Tonight's broadcast is about attachment theory, and I have a few questions that I want to answer leading into it. This is a webinar that I've done, broadcast that I've done for the third or fourth time. There's been a slightly different perspective each time, a different point of emphasis, and so I wanted to answer the question about why I do things more than once. Number one is just to get them into the rotation, because the last time I did this was somewhere around a year and a half ago. The second reason that I do it is because I myself learned something in the process, some new aspect has developed for me. I had a very kind parent reach out to me via email the last couple of days and thank me for a recent broadcast, saying it was timely for them, something that they needed to hear. And what I said back and would want all of you to know is it's really what I need to hear. It's oftentimes something that is timely for me. Sometimes I get, of course, suggestions or requests from parents or therapists, but oftentimes when I'm trying to choose a new topic, I'm thinking about what's the most recent lesson, the most recent challenge that I've been working on in my life. Lastly, I want to say this is at the top of what is most important, at the core of what is most important. I think attachment theory, like other psychological phrases or jargon, I think it's maybe misunderstood or not understood quite as well as it could be. And I cannot overstate the importance, in my opinion, from my perspective, from my observations, experience, the importance of the concepts in attachment theory as they relate to the work that we do here at Evoke and also the parenting work that we do here or support here at Evoke. So, why attachment? To go on further, first of all, because of the broad and deep effects healthy versus unhealthy attachment has on our children. It is, in my experience, by far, the most important factor that contributes to resilience. There are other behaviors that come out of it, right? We talk about setting healthy boundaries. We talk about having limits in the home, other aspects that we expect and require of our children. But really, those are often just the outcome of having healthy attachment. And know in the beginning that having healthy attachment requires a parent to have done their work and more fully develop their own sense of self. It's a trauma buffer, right? So when trauma is introduced into our life, and it is introduced into everybody's life, more or less, a healthy attachment can help to mitigate that trauma. It leads to clear thinking processes in children, right? That their brain gets wired in such a way where because they feel safe, because they feel seen, because they don't feel threatened, they have a secure base. And that is extraordinarily critical. And then making reasonable, healthy decisions throughout our lives. Now, I'll say that there are other factors that contribute to it, but it is, according to the research that I've seen, the most important contributor. And adolescents and young adults are still going to go through some struggle with their decision making because of the development or lack of development of their brain. It helps people who have experienced it have a response flexibility. And response flexibility is in contrast to being reactive, being triggered, seeing red, responding from that primitive reptilian lower brain, right? We have more agency, more choice. I saw a baseball manager describing a very difficult play last week in baseball. It was actually a triple play, and only 2 defenders touched the ball, which is very, very rare. And he said about his third baseman, he said he had a really slow heartbeat at the time. And he's referring to this idea that everything slows down when you're practiced, right? In this area, in baseball. In the case of parenting, when you have done your work so that you've dealt with made some improvements on processing your own trauma so you can be there. And that contributes to the child having a safer container, right? A more capable container. Less anxiety and really less mental health issues in general, right? But when we carry around inside of us a healthy copy of ourselves, so to speak, right? That thing that gets created when somebody is seeing and has capacity in our life. We walk around with a sense of okayness. And people operate in their own lives and in relationships much, much better when they're carrying around a sense of okayness. Um, this is one area. We don't have a lot of control over a lot of areas in our life, but this is one area that we as parents have a lot to say, right? At creating healthy attachment experiences for our children. We don't have control over their peers, society, in some cases their genetics. Or even if they came from us, there are still random genetics in there, and especially if they didn't come from us and our partner for that matter. So this is some area that we have a lot of control over, is developing this healthy attachment. Um, because our unresolved issues are barriers. That this speaks to that need that I talk about so often, that we must do our own work, that we must be engaged in it, that we must have a healthy practice of our own work in order to show up in a way to present optimally or near optimally for our children, or towards optimally. It applies to all of us, right? All of us need work on attachment. Nobody has a perfect attachment. There are some that are much better than others. None of us came from perfect attachment. None of us can provide perfect attachment. So with that, it's universal. Wherever you fit, either as a child or a parent on that continuum, this has application to you, for you. It's the single most important, in my experience, the single most important issue to address in parenting our children. I do a similar kind of thing when I'm supervising therapists, because we don't necessarily call it attachment in a therapeutic relationship, but it's a similar principle. We call it the transference and countertransference dynamic. So I wanted to say what it looks like. I love lists that talk about, to give you practical examples of what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. What it looks like, this is, imagine situations where you're responding to your child. Either something happened, some behavior of theirs, or they're sharing or showing up or telling you something that they're thinking or feeling. Thank you for telling me. You know, that's a uh, particularly powerful statement, especially in those situations where what they're telling you is either hard to hear or risky for them to share. Tell me more. I want to understand, right? I miss that one all the time. My wife is much better at that one. I go to the place of assuming I get it already right away, and then am tempted to comment on it. I appreciate knowing, glad you told me. You know, especially the examples I've given in the past is when a child says to a parent, I don't trust you. I don't think you listen to me, right? You never listen or hear me. You don't understand. There are so many responses that are so common for us, that are instinctive for us, that run contrary to this idea. So if we can switch it, flip it to I appreciate knowing, I'm glad you told me. That's what healthy attachment looks like practically. Responding to a difficult situation, that sounds hard. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry you're going through it. And I'm sorry doesn't mean I did it. It just means I'm sad for you. I'm really sorry you have to go through this, or that this happened to you. Sometimes the only thing I can utter is I'm here, I'm listening. You know, it's really close to just keeping my mouth shut. You're not alone. Really important. It addresses the core need that attachment addresses, which is connection. You're not alone. That makes sense. I find myself saying that in therapy a lot, because it makes sense to me. You know, when I practice deep and patient listening, it makes sense that you're feeling what you felt. Is there anything that I can do? I've been reminded not to ask that too quickly, because it sounds maybe like you're going to problem solving. But at some point, checking in. What would you like from me? Is there anything I can do for you? Do you want me to just listen? Do you want me to just hear it? Do you want me to reflect it? You must have a good reason. I would like to understand. This speaks to that idea that if we could read, as Longfellow says, if we could read the secret history of our enemies, we would find in each man's story suffering sufficient to disarm all hostility. If we could see inside of somebody, the most crazy looking thing, sounding thing would make sense in some context. What can I do to help support you? Similar to the question of, is there anything that I can do? A little bit more nurturing. And then, the deepest levels are, I can relate. I haven't had that situation exactly, but I've felt similar feelings in different situations. All right. So this is what healthy attachment does not look like. Some of these might sound ridiculous, but I say some of these. I've said probably all of these at some time. That is silly, irrational, unreasonable, stupid, ridiculous. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But I know for all of us, there's moments when our children seem to be expressing something silly, irrational, unreasonable, stupid, or ridiculous. I think these next few are much more insidious because they're really an attempt for us to deal with our lack of capacity, our inadequacy as a container, and make it about our child. You're too sensitive. You're scaring me. You're being selfish, right? All of that is an attempt to make them smaller so that they can fit within our limited capacity. And I've done all versions of all of those things. A pretty broad one is anything where it has the word should in it. You should. In response to, again, them sharing something, offering an experience, getting caught in a certain kind of behavior. Don't pay them any mind, they're just jealous. I put that on there because it's rather specific, but it's an example where we think we're being helpful. Right? We think we're saying, don't let it get to you. It's not about you, it's about them. But it still is dismissing and erasing. Ignore them, similar. You'll get over it. Any version of that. Look on the bright side. Again, some of these are less obvious than others. They sound like they could come from good intention. And then I put this one, and I emphasized it. If you're watching on the webinar, I emphasized the first word in the sentence as bright, dark red. Why did you do that? And the reason I emphasize the word why is because we usually don't mean, why did you do that? Why are you doing that? We usually mean, why did you do that, you stupid idiot? Or you're just a stupid idiot. That's ridiculous. That's a dumb decision. Right? It's okay to say, I'd like to understand more, and really mean it, and really listen to the answer. But when why gets used in this other way, it's just a statement that looks like a question that is masking a shameful statement. Have you tried this, right? Offering solutions. You should try this. Have you tried talking to your boss? Have you tried telling your friends? Have you tried talking to your parents? That is your depression, insecurity, anxiety, narcissism, defense, rationalization, justification, ... right? Anytime we just go right into interpretation, takes very little talent, capacity, right? It's okay for us to know that that might be part of it, but then to respond with the compassion, those other ways that I described. And this is very important. After saying all of that, I want to be clear. And it can also look like you stating your needs or limits, as in, this is my limit. This is what I feel comfortable with. I am not willing to do that, support that. Being a healthy container, being an adequate container, providing healthy attachment doesn't require you to abandon self. In fact, it requires you to develop self. And you're allowed to. The key is just to own it as about you. All of the above are okay. All the above statements are okay and consistent with a healthy self and a parent. We all have limits. Our job is just to own ours rather than arguing that we are right or making them wrong or too much or too little. That's in some ways a simple difference, but very difficult to execute because it's very difficult for us to own our part. Well, it's very easy to make somebody else the problem and even recruit others to prove that we are right. Attachment theory describes the interpersonal relationships between individuals. It helps to understand how people respond to hurt, separations, and perceived threats. Bowlby, the first attachment theorist, studied primates to understand how infants attach to their parents and described this instinct in evolutionary context because such instincts ensure the survival of the child. Studying parent-child attachment as a precursor in adult romantic relationships and subsequent adult-child relationships. I've shared this before, but my dissertation in doctoral school was about looking at attachment, looking at it in the face of specific traumas, and then seeing if there was any mitigating factor that would predict functioning in young adult relationships. And the one thing that we found was if a consistent, stable, capable person what was in the child's life could see them, gave them this sense that I'm describing, that mitigated the trauma. It had less effect. It didn't result in developing symptoms in relationship. Characteristics of attachment, and I've described this is the more technical stuff. A safe haven. When the child feels threatened or afraid, he or she can return to the caregiver for comfort or soothing. And like I said, eventually you can carry around a copy of that caregiver. Right? I carry a copy in my brain of my therapist now. When something happens, I'm often able to say, what would Jamie say to me? How would she respond to this? Right? What would she tell me right now? A secure base. The caregiver provides a secure and dependable base for the child to explore the world, right? They're able to demonstrate courage, take risks, reasonable risks. Proximity maintenance. The child strives to stay near or the caregiver, thus keeping the child safe. That's early childhood. And then, of course, in adolescence, they explore more. And separation distress. When separated from the caregiver, the child will become upset and distressed. Again, that's what we see in early childhood. When parents understand, Siegel and Hartzell say, when parents understand that they can let their children have and express their desires without having to fulfill them, it frees the parent to make a connection to the child's experience without having to deny their feelings. I cannot tell you how many parents tell me stories like that, where they did it differently. They just heard their child instead of responding to their instinct to rescue, to make the child feel comfortable. Right? It's ironic, really, to hear and respond to the child in the ways that I'm described makes them feel comfortable versus trying to talk them into being comfortable, which ironically makes them feel alone, lost, unheard. And we've got to have enough capacity to know that it's not necessarily our job to fulfill the needs of the child, but just to sit in the pain with them, the loss with them, the hurt, the fear, the sadness, the grief with them. I cannot tell you how many parents have told me that they've tried this, and they will come back and say it's like magic. It's hard to believe. It doesn't always happen the first time, but parents will share really profound experiences of responding to their child in these ways. I love this quote. Of course, all parents and therapists fail at times, some more, some less. But some parents and therapists, i.e. containers, cannot maintain a balance of mind. In failing, the parent becomes a container that is either too rigid or too fragile. A rigid mother takes in and utters formal responses without a real understanding of the infant's distress. A fragile parent will, when confronted by her distressed baby, go to pieces and panic. In either case, the infant receives back its own projection with the implicit message that after all, as it feared, its state of mind is not tolerable. Its state of mind is not tolerable. It suffers in Bayon's terms, the nameless dread, i.e. the state of mind that is not thinkable. We learn about ourselves as children by how our parents handle our distress, our pain, our fears, our sadness, our hurt, our mistakes. We learn about ourselves. We learn whether we're okay or not. We see the angst on their face, and we interpret that as something is wrong with me. We see the anger, the frustration, and we read that as something is wrong with me. And the research, folks, is replete in this process. It is replicated over and over and over again. And now that we have access to brain imaging that we didn't 20, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, we can actually see the brain change shape in such a way that shows us when it's being damaged or not. Jessica Benjamin said, recognition is that response from the other which makes meaningful the feelings, intentions, and actions of the self. Recognizing, resonating, seeing a child helps them develop a self. Children learn about themselves by the way we communicate with them, Siegel and Hartzell. And then Gill says, part of the business of psychotherapy, right? Part of the business of therapy is to discover and create alternate experiences for thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and beliefs. This is undertaken in the service of freeing people up to be able to re-experience themselves in a safe but different context, right? It's a reparative experience to sit in therapy and show up and take the risk that what happened in other contexts might happen again. The virtue of talking to an empathic and accepting person who has a different base is that it quickly illuminates one's own. What was automatic and unconscious is noticed and discussed. Right? When I'm in, I learned that many years ago with Jamie. Sitting in that room for an hour each week, showing up, telling my story, sharing my experience, and have somebody that remained curious, unanxious, patient, understanding, and compassionate changed everything for me. It is too often assumed that a mother will be able to give her child faith in tackling the world, even if she can no longer muster it for herself. And although mothers ordinarily aspire to more for their children than themselves, there are limits to this trick. A mother who is too depressed by her own isolation cannot get excited about her child learning to walk or talk. A mother who is too afraid of people cannot feel relaxed about her child's association with other children. A mother who stifles her own longings, ambitions, and frustrations cannot tune in empathically to her child's joys and failures. The only recognition a child seeks is something the mother is able to give by virtue of her independent identity. The mother cannot and should not be a mirror. She must really reflect back to the child what the child asserts. She must embody something, not me. And don't get distracted by the fact that it says mothers, because in historical contexts, attachment theory was all about the mother because they were the primary caregiver. Fundamentally, we have evolved more with feminism and in our world to see that the father's experience has something to do, and fathers are often spending more time with the children. So sometimes it's called a functional mother. But Dr. Benjamin is saying that the mother has to develop a self and can't give the child, can't feed the child from an empty cup, right? And like I said, since she wrote The Bonds of Love, we now look at a functional MRI or brain scan, and we can see parent-child interactions and how it affects the brain and the functioning. As a parent, making sense of your life is important because it supports your ability to provide emotional connecting and flexible relationships with your children. Having a coherent sense of your own life history enables you to offer the kind of experiences that help children make sense of their own lives. There may be other times when we may become aware of being filled with sensations that we cannot name or understand logically. It goes back to underscore the value, that's from Siegel and Hartzell, parenting from the inside out, how important it is to repair our trauma, to look at. And by the way, this is important. The success of this project, right? The basis of this project of working on your own trauma. This is the incredible thing, and the research shows this. It doesn't matter how much trauma you have. If you could think of trauma as 0 to 100, it doesn't matter if you only have 20 and somebody else has 50 or 70 or 80. It matters how much you've processed it. So that should give hope to the person who's had 70 or 80 or 90, and that should light a fire into the person who's only had 20, to suggest that it still is his or her job to figure out what wasn't ideal, what was less than optimal. And making sense out of all of that can get you to a place where you can create the opportunity for a healthy attachment experience. I've heard people argue about, especially in cases of adoption and severe abandonment or trauma, or some kind of trauma that fractures the attachment. You cannot repair attachment wounds, right? You can just learn how to cope with them. The research, the science doesn't support that idea. The research says that therapy doesn't necessarily undo the loss of a fractured attachment. What it does do, because that has to be grieved, what it does do is it repairs the damage caused in the brain and in the psyche. And the loss or the fracture or the trauma is something that becomes integrated into the person, right? Becomes a part of their wholeness. I have 3 simple bullet points for the take home tonight. And they are these. Providing a secure base requires you to do your own work and resolve to some degree your trauma, to make progress in that area. There's no way around this. And I say this with all the compassion and humility that I can muster, because I work on it all the time. And I don't have an idea of when I'll arrive, when I'll finish. Attachment is the most important ingredient in the development of resiliency, mitigating trauma, dealing with stress, dealing with subsequent trauma. There was one research study that I saw that showed how people with more difficult attachment histories, right, more fractured attachment histories, they required more opioid use post-injury or surgery than those who had healthy attachment, right? That's amazing. People that reported a more fractured attachment history required more pain relief after a physical injury. Makes sense why that idea comes to us that people that are self-medicating, become addicted to substances, often have to go back to their trauma or attachment history. Makes sense why that famous TED Talk speech on addiction, where the researcher concludes the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's attachment or connection. In order to take somebody where they need to go, you need to have been there. You have to have the depth needed to contain their pain, right? So somebody asked me today, is it necessary that your mentor have the same experience? If you're suicidal, do you need to talk to somebody who has struggled with suicide and overcome it? If you're an addict, you need to talk to somebody who's battled addiction and overcome it, and on and on and on. And I said, no, they don't have to have the exact same experience, but they need to have had some experience, enough to have gone to the depths, so that when somebody brings them a certain pain, that they can say, I know what it's like to be scared. I don't have the experience of coming out as gay or transgender. I don't have that experience personally. And what that would feel like and how frightening that would be. But I know what it's like to be afraid to share parts of myself, and I've made mistakes in that area, to share parts of myself for fear that I wouldn't be acceptable to the other person. All right, I'm happy to take any live questions. First parent asks, please share. First response, listening to this, I am more aware of the fact that there is no conversation with my son, no expression of feeling. That is a fantastic awareness. That is half the battle. It is one of my favorite things to hear a parent say when after a discussion or a group or a transformative process or a crisis, they come away with, I thought I was doing better than I was doing. Not from a shameful, self-flagellating place, but like, that's what enlightenment is, right? Enlightenment, as they say, is a destructive process. It is an unlearning process. There was a quote on our Facebook this week that said something like the first task is finding out who you are, and the second task is liking who you find, right? So that breaking of your shell is halfway to understanding, acceptance, healing, and being there for your child. It's really, really critical. On the contrary, when a parent presents that says, I was a great parent, I'm always a little reluctant, right? I'm always a little worried about that. Because in my experience, the most enlightened souls that have walked on this earth, this planet, could speak at length about their flaws. And not from a place of guilt or shame, but from a place of awareness. In fact, they had to make friends with those limitations, those shortcomings, to be able to see them. They had to. That's in a sense what therapy is about. So thank you for that comment. All right, I'll go with some upcoming announcements, and then we will take any other questions that have come in. Attend 6 12-step support groups. That's our request, that you attend 6 12-step support groups while you're with us. Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, you can go to their websites. Any combination of 6. 2 to one, 2 to the other, 2 to last, or 6 of one. Any combination. Also, you can go to NAMI.org, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and get classes and get resources that are affordable and free in your area. All of these broadcasts are available on your podcast app. If you have an iPhone or an iOS device, go to the podcast app and search Evoke Therapy Programs. If you have an Android device or computer, download the SoundCloud app on the Android device, or go to soundcloud.com on a computer and search Evoke Therapy Programs. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Evoke Therapy. And on Facebook, you find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs. You can go to the Evoke Family Foundation on Facebook if you want to learn about an organization that helps people that can't afford therapy, if you want to become involved in that. And of course, go to our blog to get new content each week. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available on Amazon. You can also get an Audible or a CD version of it there. We would like all parents who possibly can. It's a great multifamily experiential weekend to go to a workshop. So if it's possible, we would like you to. We request it of you. The next one is September 22nd and 23rd at our Cascades, our Oregon program. Also check with your therapist if you're traveling great distance or if you're at the Cascades program, and see if the timing fits with a visit to see your child. Contact Melanie at evoketherapy.com for more information or to RSVP. If you want to take a deep dive, you want to look at your own attachment history, you can really take a really large step in healing some of these wounds, I would encourage you. I do it myself every year. Personally, it is incredibly powerful. Come to one of our intensives. The next one that has an opening is October 17th to 21st. Or you can schedule a private family intensive by contacting our admissions department or emailing intensives at evoketherapy.com. We also do couples, individual couples. Our upcoming parent support groups, I'll be in Los Angeles this Sunday, the 26th, 4 to 7. We do it on Sunday in LA to help avoid traffic. On Bay Area, we'll be hosting on the 27th. New York City on Monday, September 10th, 7 to 9. We made a mistake and scheduled the next two New York meetings on Jewish holidays, and we will try to do better, and we feel horribly about this. So I apologize. And then in Birmingham, Alabama, it'll be the last weekend. We'll pick a specific day soon, the last weekend in October. We'll be in Chicago on November 6th. That's National Voting Day, 7 to 9 p.m. And in Philadelphia, November 14th, 7 to 9 p.m. Contact again, Melanie@evoketherapy.com to RSVP here for more information. Pursuits trips are adventure trips anywhere customizable from 3 to 30 days. International. Think of therapy light. Think of sober fun. All right, any other questions come in? It sounds like addiction is one symptom of a lack of attachment. What are other symptoms in a person that is not securely attached? It is, yeah, it's sort of a symptom. It's sort of a trigger point for addiction, right? It predisposes one, makes one susceptible to addiction. That's what I would say. And so any mental health issue really is in that category. It makes you more vulnerable. The particular style of mental illness that you have, and we all have one style or another, is yours. But lack of attachment creates a kind of a vulnerability to depression, anxiety, personality disorders, right? Other kinds of addictions, all of that. So that's the way I would state it, is it creates a vulnerability. We know that there's a genetic component to all of these things too. But like I said, once the child is born, we don't have any control over that. You can't change genetics. But you can change the shape and functioning of a brain. You can add to its resiliency to respond to stress. You can participate in such a way to either create a greater vulnerability or a greater resistance. And that's why I don't talk in black and white absolute cause and effect terms. For me, it's a really exciting discovery and not a shameful one. I hope that's true for you all too. All right, folks, thanks for joining us tonight. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. Thank you on behalf of your children for doing your work. The next broadcast will be Thursday the 30th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. So, August 30th, please send out invitations to friends, family, siblings. You can ask. They can ask questions directly during. They can send in questions in advance, and so can you. You can ask questions about friends and family and sibling. You can ask questions as a proxy for those people, like some question you're getting asked by them. Ask me and see what answer I might have for it. So they can attend. They can submit. You can submit for them. Please extend the invitation. We'd love to have a fantastic turnout to support you, and especially the siblings at home who sometimes, I think parents worry that they might fall behind because they're not participating in as much depth as the parents and the child at Evoke are participating. All right, folks, have a fantastic week and weekend, and I'll talk to you next Thursday night. Take care. Bye-bye.